Hello, I'm continuing my reviews on the Godzilla series with Son of Godzilla. Now, Son of Godzilla came out in 1967, and this is the 8th film in the Godzilla franchise. The film is once again directed by Jun Fukuda, who also directed the previous film, Ebirah Horror of the Deep, or Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. And this is also Toho's second Godzilla film in a row to be set on an island. And one thing you'll notice about this movie and the previous film is they're working with a significantly lower budget than the earlier Godzilla films. And I have Son of Godzilla on VHS, and unfortunately I lost the case for this a long time ago. Now, Son of Godzilla is definitely kind of polarizing among fans. Like, some people love it and some people really hate it. Basically, at this point, the Godzilla series was starting to get goofier and more geared towards children, but this is the first Godzilla film that I would outright call a kids' film. Like, it's really a movie for kids, and as a kids' film, I actually don't think this movie's that bad. Actually, I really like Son of Godzilla. Sure, it's cheesy as hell, but I think that was the point. Like, again, this one was meant to be more of a kid's film. And it's funny because for all intents and purposes, I should hate this movie because the original Godzilla is my favorite film of all time, and that's an extremely serious film and treats the subject matter like serious drama, and then you have this comedic kids film. But first of all, if you're approaching this movie, you really do kind of have to put the original Godzilla out of your mind when watching this movie. Now, I'll also admit right up front that I do have a lot of nostalgia for this movie. I first saw this movie when I was a really little kid, so maybe the reason I'm not as hard on this movie as a lot of other people might be is because, again, I first saw it when I was a little kid. And this movie was also the introduction of Minya, or Manila, depending on how you want to pronounce it, the titular son of Godzilla. Now, growing up, I always used to call Minya Godzuki, because in the late 70s, Hanna-Barbera acquired the rights to Godzilla, and they made an animated Godzilla series, and in that series, Godzilla had a nephew called Godzuki. Now, obviously I wasn't alive in the 1970s, but in the late 90s and early 2000s, Cartoon Network used to show reruns of the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla series, and I used to watch that all the time, and I always thought that Godzuki from that show was supposed to be the same character from this movie. But as I got older, I realized that the character's not called Godzuki, he's Minya or Manila. Now, this might destroy all my credibility, because I know Minya is not very well liked by Godzilla fans, but I'll be honest, I like Minya. I actually like that little thing. I honestly think it's kinda cute. So, the plot of Son of Godzilla is it follows a group of scientists on this island conducting experiments with the weather, and a nosy journalist named Goro comes to the island to get the big scoop, and they reluctantly accept him as a member of their crew. But it turns out that the island is inhabited by a bunch of giant man-sized mantises. And Goro ends up discovering a girl on the island, but nobody will believe him when he tells them about the girl. But basically they conduct one of these experiments and it goes wrong, resulting in a radioactive storm. The radioactive storm ends up mutating these man-sized mantises into, well, Godzilla-sized mantises. And then you see the giant mantises clawing at this mountain and they dig out a giant egg. They crack the egg open, revealing a baby Godzilla. And then the real Godzilla shows up to save the baby. Now, the actual origins of the egg are kind of left ambiguous in the movie. I've heard some people theorize that Godzilla is supposed to be asexual and he laid the egg himself, or herself, or itself. But the most commonly accepted theory is that this was an egg laid by another creature of the same species as Godzilla, possibly millions of years ago, and then this radioactive storm possibly revived the creature in the egg. But Godzilla ends up taking this baby creature in as his own. This movie, like some of the previous Godzilla films, are definitely given the monster's human qualities, which in my opinion works for this one because again, this is meant to be more of a kid's film. But basically in the movie, Goro ends up befriending this girl who lives on the island, and then he introduces her to the scientists. And the scientists have to continue with their experiments, but they have to deal with these giant mantises and then a giant spider called Kamanga. Now, if you watch the English dub of the movie, for some reason they call him Spiga. And throughout the film, Godzilla is trying to raise and teach this baby Godzilla. Now, several of the actors who appear in this movie have also appeared in other Godzilla movies. At this point, they were basically recycling some of the same actors, but always as different characters. Goro was played by Akira Kubo, who's been in several other Godzilla movies. The scientist who's spearheading this weather experiment is played by, I'm probably going to butcher this actor's name, but I think it's Tadao Takashima, and he also played Sakurai in King Kong vs. Godzilla. Akihiko Hirata also shows up in this movie as one of the scientists. I do want to point out that Hirata is probably my favorite reoccurring actor from any of these movies. Kenji Sahara also has a small role in this movie, and I can't believe I haven't mentioned him in any of my other Godzilla reviews, because he actually has the distinction of appearing in more Godzilla movies than any other actor. He was an extra in the original Godzilla, he showed up in King Kong vs. Godzilla, he played one of the main villains of Mothra vs. Godzilla, he was also in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, he's in this movie, and he would go on to appear in many other Godzilla movies after this. The acting in the movie is pretty good. Now, I've only seen the dubbed version of this, so it is kind of hard for me to completely gauge the acting, being that I've only seen it dubbed, so I'm not actually hearing these actors' real voices. Now, the actor who really stood out in this movie to me, even in the dubbed version, was Yoshio Tsuchiya, and I know I'm butchering his name, but he's been in many other Godzilla films, and in this movie he plays a scientist who's starting to go kinda crazy because of how long they've been on the island. But yeah, I like Son of Godzilla, but I totally understand why somebody wouldn't like this one. Again, it is really goofy. But over the years, I've grown to appreciate both the serious Godzilla films and the cheesier, campier Godzilla films. Now, while this one certainly isn't meant to be taken as seriously as the earlier Godzilla films, oddly enough, there actually are some serious discussions in the film about overpopulation. That's actually part of the reason they're doing these weather experiments, is so they could make plants and vegetation grow in the desert to prevent world hunger. So, even though it's meant for kids, you still get a little bit of social commentary. And the monster battles in the film are actually really cool. The giant mantises, Kamacuras, are actually really cool kaiju, so is Kamanga. Now, while I do like this one, I'm not the biggest fan of Godzilla's look in the movie. Honestly, out of all the Godzilla suits, this is easily the worst. Now, Minya would show up in the next two Godzilla movies, Destroy All Monsters and Godzilla's Revenge. And as I alluded to before, the character of Godzuki from the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla series from the 70s was probably inspired by Minya. And then the Heisei series in the 90s, which was in a different continuity than this, you did have sort of a variation on the Minya concept. And Minya would also show up in the 2004 Godzilla film, Godzilla Final Wars. Now I want to cut to my friend Christian Feliciano giving his thoughts on Son of Godzilla.
Godzilla is so much a superhero that not only does he have his little band of superheroes that come together to form some kind of a team, but he also has a kid sidekick. Like, what? You know, they just at this point, you're just like, why not? You know, why not? And I love Minya, not Godzuki. Damn you, Hanna-Barbera, for that. It's not Godzuki. Minya is the character that is the son of Godzilla's name. That is his name, and it's a really cute character, really cute creature. I love meaning as so much. I love that Godzilla is now this father figure, and I love that or a father, actually, he's a father. But I just love that you get to see him be a father. I love that he has this creature now that he can love. And yeah, it's pretty much for the same reason. They put him in there pretty much for the same reason that they put Robin in the Batman comics, which was pretty much to draw kids in, a lot more kids in. And I guess it works because, the film series does gear towards children. This is pretty much, they've already been doing that, but at this point, this is where it's going. Let's just bring kids in. The villains in this, a lot more fun. The story in this is really, really cool. It has these scientists in it and all that. It's a praying mantis at this point, and there's a couple, there's a few of them. So it's just fun to see that. It wasn't just a giant lobster. Now, I don't know why I prefer a praying mantis to a lobster, but just bear with me, because the praying mantis is actually a cool villain. I like the praying mantis. I like that you get to see these characters fight. And there are actually a few of them. It's not like it's just one praying mantis. There are actually, several of them. So it's like this is a threat that Godzilla can face, instead of just a lobster. And yeah, that's my logic anyway. That's how far my logic goes when it comes to these films. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and bye-bye.